The sun hung low over the endless plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Dust rose in lazy swirls from the dry earth, and the wind carried the scent of sage and distant mountains. Clayton Hart rode alone, his horse's hooves stirring the silence of the land. He was a lone cowboy, with a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face and eyes that had seen more than most men could bear. Life had been hard on him, and the vast desert was both a challenge and a comfort, a place where he could be free, yet still find purpose. Clayton had wandered through many towns and settlements, looking for work, for a place where he could belong. His horse, a strong bay with a white streak down its face, knew the trails well, moving steadily under his careful guidance. He was a quiet man, speaking only when necessary, watching and listening more than he talked. That was how he survived. One evening, as the sky turned deep purple, Clayton noticed smoke rising in the distance. It wasn't a campfire that any traveler would leave. It was steady and deliberate, coming from a small settlement nestled among rocky hills. Curiosity stirred in him. He had no reason to approach, yet something pulled him forward. As he rode closer, he noticed figures moving among the huts, women carrying water, children playing, and men tending to livestock. This was a small Apache village, hidden from the main trails, protected by both the land and the people who called it home. Among them was Ahuli, a young Apache woman. She stood slightly apart from the others, her dark eyes sharp and watchful. She had long, black hair braided neatly down her back, and her movements were both graceful and purposeful. Ahuli was known in the village for her intelligence, courage, and independence. She respected her people deeply and understood the delicate balance between outsiders and the traditions of her tribe. Ahuli noticed Clayton almost immediately. There was something different about him, a presence that did not belong, yet did not seem threatening. But she knew better than to underestimate strangers. She moved closer to her friends and whispered a warning, her eyes never leaving the approaching cowboy. "You see him?" she asked softly. "That one. He is too close. Be careful." Clayton, meanwhile, slowed his horse at the edge of the village. He wanted to show respect, to keep his distance until he understood the people here. He dismounted carefully, tying his horse to a nearby post. He called out, in a calm, steady voice, "I mean no harm. I'm just looking for work and a place to rest for the night." Ahuli stepped forward, her gaze fixed on him. She was not afraid, but she was cautious. "You're too close, cowboy," she said clearly, her words carrying both warning and strength. "You cannot enter our lives without respect. Our people have seen too many strangers come and go." Clayton looked at her and nodded. There was no anger in him, no desire to push boundaries. Instead, he respected her words. "I understand," he said quietly. "I only want to help, if you will let me." The villagers watched silently. Some were curious, others wary. Clayton had the appearance of a man who had survived the harsh world outside. Yet there was a calm in his demeanor that suggested he was not dangerous. Ahuli studied him carefully. She could feel a story behind his eyes, a history of struggle and loss. That made her cautious, but it also stirred a faint curiosity she could not easily ignore. Over the next few days, Clayton did not intrude. He worked on the outskirts of the village, repairing fences, helping with the livestock, and performing small tasks that earned the villagers' respect. He never tried to come too close to Ahuli, but he could not help noticing her presence. She watched him sometimes from a distance, her dark eyes following his every movement. There was an unspoken tension between them, a quiet acknowledgement that their paths had crossed for a reason. Ahuli found herself thinking about him more than she wanted. She had been warned by her elders that outsiders could bring trouble, that hearts could be broken if trust was given too easily. Yet Clayton seemed different. He treated the land with respect. He listened before speaking, and he never tried to impose his way on her people. These small gestures did not escape her notice. One afternoon, Clayton approached the water source at the edge of the village. A huli was there, gathering herbs, and he paused a few steps away. He did not step closer than necessary, but he spoke softly, careful not to startle her. "I found some plants that might help with the herbs you use," he said, holding out a small bundle. Ahuli looked at him carefully, then nodded. "I will see," she replied. She took the herbs and examined them, noticing the care with which he had gathered them. It was not just help, it was thoughtfulness, a respect for her world that many strangers lacked. Days turned into a week, and a fragile routine developed. Clayton worked, Ahuli observed, and slowly, the edges of caution began to soften, not entirely, but just enough to allow brief conversations. They spoke about simple things: the weather, the land, the routines of daily life. Each word, each small interaction, built a thread of connection. One evening, after a long day of work, Clayton and Ahuli found themselves near a rocky outcrop, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was warm, and the wind carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. Ahuli finally spoke, breaking the silence that had stretched comfortably between them. "You are far from your home," she said. Clayton nodded. "I have had many homes, but none feel like the right one," he replied. "Perhaps I am still looking." Ahuli studied him, trying to understand the depth behind his words. She could sense that he was a man who carried many burdens, yet he was not hardened. There was kindness in him, a quiet strength that did not demand attention but earned it naturally. "You must be careful," she said gently. "The plains are not easy for travelers, and neither are the hearts of my people." "I will be careful," Clayton promised. "And I will respect your wishes, even if that means keeping my distance." Their connection, though tentative, grew with each passing day. Ahuli found herself thinking about him when he was not there, wondering if his quiet presence could become something more. Clayton, in turn, felt a strange sense of peace near her, a feeling he had not experienced in years of wandering. One morning, the village was stirred by news of a problem in the nearby hills. Livestock had gone missing, and the villagers feared it was the work of bandits. Clayton offered to help track the missing animals, not out of pride, but out of genuine concern for the people who had begun to accept him. Ahuli watched him prepare, her heart uneasy, yet aware of the courage in his actions. She realized that despite her warning, she was drawn to him, not for his words, but for his deeds. Clayton's respect for the village, for her people, and for her, was unlike anything she had encountered before. As he rode toward the hills, she whispered quietly to herself, almost as if testing the truth of her own feelings. "You are too close, cowboy. And yet, perhaps not close enough to keep away." The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Clayton moved with purpose, determined to prove that trust could be earned, even in a world that had taught both him and Ahuli to be wary. And as he disappeared into the horizon, the promise of what might come lingered in the warm, open air. A story just beginning, shaped by courage, respect, and the slow, careful unfolding of hearts, learning to meet halfway. Clayton rode hard through the hills, the wind whipping against his face and the dust rising behind him. He followed the faint tracks of the missing livestock, paying close attention to every detail. The plains were beautiful, but they were also unforgiving, and he knew that one wrong step could lead to disaster. Yet he felt a strange determination, a sense of purpose that went beyond just finding the animals. This task was more than work, it was a way to show Ahuli and her people that he could be trusted. Hours passed as he tracked the signs across the rugged land. Clayton moved silently, reading the tracks and listening to the subtle sounds of the desert. He noticed broken branches, hoofprints, and a trail that led toward a narrow canyon. The thought of danger never left his mind, but he pressed on, driven by the quiet hope that he could prove himself useful to the village and perhaps closer to Ahuli than he had dared imagine. Meanwhile, back at the village, Ahuli paced near the edge of the camp, glancing toward the hills. She felt a mix of worry and anticipation. Clayton was strong and capable, but the world beyond their settlement was harsh and unpredictable. Her heart urged her to go to him, but her mind reminded her of the warnings from her elders. Trust was earned, not given. Still, she could not help the flutter of hope that he would succeed and return safely. As Clayton reached the canyon, he discovered the missing livestock trapped in a small ravine. The animals had wandered too close to the steep edges and could not climb back. It was a dangerous situation, but Clayton was experienced and careful. He tied ropes to his horse and fashioned a pulley with nearby trees to lift the animals one by one. Sweat ran down his face, his arms ached. But he moved with steady determination, knowing that every success mattered. Hours later, the livestock was safe, and Clayton began the journey back to the village. The sun was lowering again, casting long shadows across the hills. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his actions had demonstrated both skill and respect for the people who had welcomed him cautiously. Yet his mind remained on Ahuli, wondering if she would see beyond the caution in her eyes and recognize the effort he had made. When he returned, the village erupted in relief and quiet celebration. The children ran to meet him, their laughter echoing across the open space. The elders nodded approvingly, recognizing the value of his help. And then, from the edge of the crowd, Ahuli approached, her expression calm, yet thoughtful. "You returned safely," she said softly, her voice carrying both relief and curiosity. "And the animals are safe." Clayton nodded, offering a small smile. "They are, thanks to some luck and careful planning." Ahuli studied him closely, noticing the dust on his clothes, the tiredness in his eyes, and the quiet pride he carried. There was no boastfulness, no desire for praise, only a sense of responsibility and respect. She felt a shift within herself, a breaking of the invisible walls she had kept around her heart. "You did well," she said simply. "It is not easy to handle the plains or the hills, yet you did it without harming the land or the animals." Clayton's gaze softened. "I care for this land now, and for the people who live on it. I am learning to respect both, just as I hope to earn trust along the way." Over the following days, Clayton and Ahuli spent more time together. Not in forced conversation or awkward exchanges, but in shared work and quiet companionship. Clayton helped repair fences, gather firewood, and assist with daily tasks, always careful not to intrude or take more than necessary. Ahuli observed him closely, noticing the small ways he showed thoughtfulness, how he moved with care, how he listened more than he spoke, how he treated even the smallest animals with gentleness. One afternoon, they were working together to gather herbs near a stream. Ahuli showed Clayton how to identify the plants, explaining their uses and the traditions surrounding them. Clayton listened attentively, asking questions with genuine interest. "Your knowledge of the land is remarkable," he said. "I have traveled far, but I have never seen anyone understand the plants and animals like you do." Ahuli smiled faintly, feeling a warmth in her chest she had not expected. "The land teaches us if we listen," she replied, "and we must respect it, or it will teach us harsh lessons." As they worked, they spoke of their pasts in careful fragments. Clayton shared stories of hardships on the trails, of towns that had welcomed him briefly before he moved on, and of the loneliness that often accompanied a wandering life. Ahuli spoke of her responsibilities to her people, the pride she felt in her heritage, and the fears she carried about outsiders. Each story, each shared memory, built a thread between them, weaving a connection that neither had anticipated. Yet the village remained cautious. Not everyone trusted Clayton, and whispers circulated among the elders and some villagers. Ahuli felt the tension, knowing she could not ignore the opinions of those who had guided her life. But she also felt the pull of something stronger than fear or caution, a desire to see if trust could grow between two very different people. One evening, A storm swept across the plains. Rain poured from dark clouds, turning the dry earth to mud. The wind howled, and the children were brought indoors for safety. Clayton noticed that part of the village fence had been damaged, leaving livestock vulnerable. Without hesitation, he stepped into the rain, working tirelessly to repair it before the animals wandered into danger. Ahuli watched from the doorway, her heart pounding. Here was a man who risked himself for the safety of her people without complaint, without seeking recognition. Her respect for him deepened, and along with it, something tender and fragile began to bloom in her heart. When the storm finally passed, Clayton emerged, soaked and exhausted. Ahuli approached him quietly. "You did not have to risk yourself," she said softly. "I could not let the animals or the village suffer," he replied simply. "I care for both, as much as I care for earning the trust of the people who live here." Ahuli studied him, noticing the sincerity in his eyes. "You have earned respect," she said, her voice steady yet carrying emotion. "And perhaps something more." Over time, their bond grew. It was not hurried or careless. It was slow and deliberate, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and an understanding of each other's worlds. Ahuli began to feel that Clayton was not merely an outsider who wandered into her life, but someone who could walk beside her in the future. Someone who understood the value of respect and care. Clayton, for his part, felt a quiet joy he had not known in years. The loneliness of the trail, the endless search for purpose, seemed less heavy when he was near her. He understood that earning her trust was not about words or gestures alone, but about consistent actions. About showing that he belonged not just in the land, but in the lives of those he had come to care for. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Ahuli and Clayton stood together on a ridge overlooking the village. The sky was ablaze with color, and the wind carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. Neither spoke for a while, letting the moment stretch between them. Finally, Ahuli turned to him. "You are no longer too close, Cowboy," she said with a small, almost shy smile. "But the path ahead is still long, and hearts are not given lightly." Clayton took her hand gently, not to claim but to connect. "I understand," he said, "and I will walk that path with you, respecting every step." The plains stretched endlessly before them, full of challenges, beauty, and uncertainty. But in that moment, both felt a sense of hope. A hope that trust could grow, that hearts could heal, and that two very different people could find a place together in a world that demanded resilience, courage, and care. And so, the lone cowboy and the Apache girl began a journey together, cautious but brave, aware of the difficulties yet strengthened by the bond that had slowly, carefully grown between them. It was a beginning built on respect, trust, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the greatest adventures are not just those traveled across land, but those traveled within the heart.